Last week, after writing the script for our gaslighting episode, I really got to thinking about that dark tetrad. As I often do, I was looking over the characteristics of each one, and one of the four really stood out to me. Part of that, of course, is because it's talked about so regularly in society. It gets brought up in social media, conversations with friends and family, and pops up in movies and TV all the time. I thought about certain people I've known that I would dread conversations with because we could sit and talk for 45 minutes, and afterwards I would realize that I barely got a word in edgewise. The conversation, regardless of what we were talking about, would always circle back to them. Drama with their friends, their successes at work despite coworkers or bosses that they don't get along with, or some other aspect of their life while there was never any questions about mine. Now, that isn't uncommon that people want to share about what's going on in their own lives, but it's the way they do it. I would start to talk, and without getting more than 3 words out of my mouth, they would already be jumping in to talk about themselves. I'm sure at one point or another you've been through this too. Whether it was with a coworker, a friend, a family member, and usually at some point during the conversation, you start feeling that specific sensation in your chest, a mixture of boredom and exhaustion. You start wondering how catching up became a monologue that you have to sit and listen to. You start feeling like an extra in someone else's movie, or maybe like a cardboard cutout. You realize that even though you're sitting next to this person that you're close with, you're really alone. Alone with the thoughts in your head, and maybe even start feeling guilty that you're not paying attention to what they're saying, but it's just so tedious. And over time, you start to distance yourself from that person because you simply just don't want to sit and listen to the story of their life anymore. You want a two-way street. For a long time, I looked at that through very clinical lenses. I wanted to see the data and the diagnostics. But what I've realized is that we usually encounter narcissism not in a textbook, but in our kitchens, our office cubicles, and our group chats. Today, I want to pull back the curtain. I've done the deep dive into the psychology of why people are like this, but I want to talk about it in a way that actually helps you navigate your Thursday morning. So stick around and listen to my one-sided conversation on Your Mind on Narcissism. Welcome back, everyone, to another week here on the Your Mind On podcast, where each week I pick a topic in the world of psychology, dig into the research, and share what I've learned with all of you. If this is your first time joining in, welcome. I hope you enjoy the material and come back for more, and hopefully bring some friends and family along for the ride. For those that have become more regular listeners, you might have noticed something a little different about the intro today. When I originally had the concept for this podcast, the premise was pretty easy to understand. I wanted to create a podcast that both fed my need for learning everything I possibly can about psychology, but also for teaching others in hopes that maybe along the lines I can help someone overcome a difficult situation, get out of a bad situation, or maybe understand themselves better. And I think to some degree that I've done that pretty well in the first episode, despite it being a fairly rough one. But since then, I don't feel like I've been hitting that mark at all. Not for exactly what I was intending to do, at least. You see, I've been presenting everything in a way that kind of feels like I'm teaching a college course or a high school course, and all of you that are listening are students. The topics can get a bit dry with statistics, numbers, clinical definitions, and the like, with a few more relatable things sprinkled in. And really, that's not what I want to do with this show. What I really want is for this to feel like sitting down with a friend or friends and talking about psychological topics. I want to share information in a way that doesn't feel like I'm smacking you in the head with a textbook. So this week, I'm changing up the format a little. I'm toning down the professor a little, and I'm turning up the friend. I definitely welcome any psychology students out there that want to listen in, and of course, I'm willing to go more in depth over email if you need me to. But otherwise, I want to reach a much broader group of people. As I've said before, psychology is a science that touches us every single day because it's the human mind. We all have one, or, well, maybe most of us do. There are some people out there that I think the jury's still out on. And understanding how the mind works is so important for each of us. Understanding how things like depression or obedience or conditioning and so on really impact our daily lives will only improve our lives and our understanding of the world around us. And I feel like just getting into the cold clinical side doesn't really show the truth of how these things impact us. I want to make this feel more like a conversation. So hit pause, go grab yourself a cup of coffee or tea, settle in somewhere comfortable, and then unpause, and we'll get rolling along. So, yeah, narcissism. What a topic to switch formats on, right? I can see how easy it would be to slip into that cold clinical style with something like narcissism, and I think that the reason for that is because the word is so overused in society today. I know I personally have seen social media posts, heard from coworkers and friends, that someone must surely be a narcissist because of the way they did this or said that. But usually from what I find, the person they're referencing isn't a narcissist. It's just someone that took more of a personal self-centered stance on something. I've heard it used like this. I wanted this, but they refused because they couldn't afford it. They're such a narcissist. We're going to circle back to this example because once we've covered what a narcissist actually is, we might see something really interesting here. So, what is narcissism? Well, believe it or not, it all began with a Greek myth. Now, for people that have known me for a while, this won't come as a surprise, but I'm a bit of a mythology nerd, especially when it comes to Greek mythology. In this myth, there was this hunter by the name of Narcissus. Narcissus was, according to the story, really attractive. So attractive, in fact, that it seemed like every woman that knew him wanted to marry this guy. Narcissus, however, he was also very arrogant, and he would reject each one of his admirers. And this guy, he wouldn't just reject them, he would be especially cruel about it. Well, then one day, while out hunting, the goddess Nemesis was fed up and annoyed by his behavior, so she lured Narcissus to a pool of water. He bent down to get a drink, but before he could get that drink, he saw his own reflection. Now, remember how I said that he was a really good-looking guy? Well, he must have really been because he fell in love with his own reflection. And as he stared, he began to realize that he'd fallen in love with someone that would never love him back. Because, it's a reflection. But it's also poetic how it echoes how all of those women felt about him. Now, stories tell the ending a little bit differently. In some tellings, he dies of sorrow for the love that would never be returned to him. While in others, he attempts to connect with his new love and instead drowns. I love that this myth ties in so well with the psychological disorder. It's a perfect metaphor because it captures the essence of narcissism, that deep-seated entitlement and self-importance. But in the real world, this doesn't always look like someone staring into a pool of water. It usually shows up in one of two ways, either the loud, grandiose type that we all recognize, or the much quieter, vulnerable type that can be a lot harder to spot. Like I said, the grandiose type is the one we usually think of when we think of a narcissist. They love the spotlight. They love having everyone's attention all the time. And if they feel like someone is starting to steal that attention away, they will do everything in their power to get it back. But it's the other side of narcissism, that vulnerable type, that a lot of people don't recognize. Both of these types or sides exist inside someone with narcissistic personality disorder, and they flip-flop between the two, but one side is usually more dominant in their personality than the other. And what might be really surprising about this is that the grandiose side, despite its loud, in-your-face, look-at-me personality, isn't the side that drives the whole disorder. It's the vulnerable side. Narcissists tend to have a really fragile self-image, and their feelings are almost always rooted in shame. So if you look at the main traits of each side of the coin, I think you'll really get a feel for how they come together and play off of each other. On the grandiose side, you have everything we generally think of with narcissism. The grandiose narcissist is everything you expect to see in a champion athlete, an A-list celebrity, or a winning politician. They view themselves as the greatest human alive and believe that they should only ever be in the company of other great humans. They don't want to chat with the barista that makes their morning latte because that's a lowly coffee employee, while they should be spending their time with the likes of maybe Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, or even the Pope. Their accomplishments in their mind are bigger and better than anything anyone else has ever done. Even the smallest things they've done that most of us wouldn't even consider to be some great feat, and they expect everyone to applaud them for it. They expect accolades and praise and even worship just for walking into a room. But that isn't where this over-the-top mindset ends. They're preoccupied with it. They fantasize about unlimited success, power, brilliance, or ideal love. Grandiose narcissists do work to improve themselves, focusing on learning new skills and knowledge, training their bodies, and improving their finances. That's normal enough, but again, the grandiose narcissist sees it all as so much bigger and better than what anyone else has done. They lift 5 pounds more on their bench press than last week? Well, that's cause to shout it from the rooftops about their massive gains. The smallest things that should be taken in stride are just so much more when they're the ones to do it. Grandiose narcissists are pretty much always extroverted, exceptionally bold socially, and really charming. That's something people usually always notice first about a narcissist. Give a narcissist in this mindset a chance, and you will begin to believe that they're everything that they feel they are. They will be assertive, and that assertiveness, they often take on an air of being controlling. You know, that reminds me of a certain journalist that I had the privilege to meet while I was deployed in Iraq. Again, I don't want to name any names, but he's been a journalist for one of the large media networks for a long time and is pretty well known. Most of you probably would know who it is, especially for having gotten banned from Iraq for a period of time for showing things on live TV that he wasn't supposed to. The day I met him was for a broadcast on one of the morning shows, and I was a bit stunned. He was barking orders at the camera crew, producers, and even the service member that had been assigned to him as an assistant, at one point telling the young soldier to sit the way you would order a dog to sit. Everything had to be perfect in his eyes, or the broadcast would be a failure. So he expected everyone to jump at his command. And you could tell, or at least I could, that he was almost offended that the soldier assigned to him was such a low rank. I believe that in his mind, this should have been one of the top brass. And all of that leads to the grand sense of entitlement that they have. They will exploit anyone they can to get what they want. The grandiose narcissist does not like to be challenged, especially at work. They will make decisions that should be made by a group, and if you don't like that decision, then they're going to come after you. They'll steal credit for the work that other people do. I'm sure most of everyone has come across someone that has this kind of mindset at work. What I think is really remarkable with narcissists is their ability to keep all of this up, especially because, as many in the psychology world believe, it's all an act, a mask that hides their dark secret. And that secret is that inside, they are exactly the opposite of what they say they are. They're vulnerable. And this isn't just an assumption. Narcissists tend to have higher levels of the stress hormone cortisol. They usually struggle to keep relationships going long term, and they develop a lack of empathy. And as we continue to crack open the shell of the vulnerable side of narcissism, we start to see just how different that soft inside part is. They're extremely self-conscious. They have to keep up their grandiose appearance, so every hair has to be perfectly in place. They have to have the nicest clothes, the most perfect body shape, and they can't have anything that they see in themselves as a flaw. When this vulnerable side of narcissism shows up, the narcissist will withdraw socially and they will get exceptionally defensive. But despite this kind of withdrawal, they still believe that they're superior or somehow more special than everyone else. They will come across as shy and humble and even put themselves down, but that's a cold, calculated move. They do this not because it's their real thoughts of themselves, but because they want people to tell them the opposite. They want people to build up their ego, so they go fishing for compliments. The vulnerable narcissist is really sensitive to criticism and is particularly concerned with social rejection. They are passive-aggressive and quick to shift blame onto anyone and everyone else. The vulnerable narcissist desperately wants to be accepted and has an almost irrational fear of rejection. And as we look at these characteristics, it has to make you wonder what makes a person like this. I mean, what happened in their lives? What did people do to them that would create this horrible storm of a personality? Well, most of the time it doesn't come from things that have happened to them. Generally, people don't just learn to be narcissists, but it also requires structural and chemical details in the brain. Researchers have found that narcissists have more activity in the parts of the brain that process conflict, social pain, and negative affect. As I mentioned before, they tend to have really high levels of stress hormones. They might appear cool and self-confident when there is some achievement-related situation like public speaking, but inside they're a nervous wreck. Even when they aren't facing some situation like that and are just at rest, they still have higher levels of stress hormones than average people. Neuroscientists have even found that there's a legitimate disconnect between the reward center and the parts of the brain that work with self-processing. They believe that this is why narcissists need constant praise and attention. So when you think of the last time you accomplished something, you most likely sat back and reflected on it and said, "I did it," and felt a sense of satisfaction. For a narcissist, though, this doesn't happen. When they accomplish something, their brains don't tell them that they've done it. They don't feel that sense of satisfaction. They need someone else to give them praise before they can feel satisfied with what they've done. Even the structure of their brains is different. It's crazy to think about, but narcissists will usually have less gray matter in their brains than most people. Because of this, they're often walking around with their raw nerves exposed, and it makes them way more likely to snap or get defensive over small things. And when they're interacting with other people, again, they have a lack of empathy. This comes across as a cold, calculated behavior, but it is, again, neuroscience. The parts of the brain that recognize the emotions that other people are feeling and cause us to feel those same sensations, or at least sympathy toward them, don't work properly in a narcissist. They just don't get that mirrored feeling. But it isn't a total disconnect either. Narcissists are able to recognize facial expressions and emotions that others have. They just don't feel anything by it. Instead, they will often calculate how these emotions they see in others will affect them. If they aren't threatened by it and they don't see a way that they can benefit or profit from it, then they will most likely just outright ignore the other person's emotions. If they feel like there's a way to exploit these emotions to benefit themselves, they will jump at the opportunity. And if they see someone else's emotions as a threat to them, like maybe they did something and someone is upset over it, they will get exceptionally defensive, shift blame onto someone else, usually the person that's initially feeling the emotions, and whatever else they can do to protect them from any kind of social blowback, because that social blowback would hurt their self-image. All of this makes relationships with narcissists especially difficult, and usually they can be considered as abusive relationships. With relationships, narcissists generally shift through 3 phases. And here's where we'll see some overlap with last week's episode on gaslighting. The first phase is idealization. They will meet someone and instantly try to form a deep connection. They use love bombing, like I talked about last week, where they shower the other person with gifts and praise and compliments. They want to spend as much time together as possible. While a narcissist truly doesn't feel empathy, they are able to fake it, at least for a little while. So they will mirror the other person's emotions, feelings, and words. They portray themselves as the perfect match, but at the same time, they usually start with the negative side of things. The narcissist may start to isolate the person from their friends and family, usually doing this through shaming. You know the old, you want to go out with your friends? But I thought we were going to go do something. I've planned my whole day around it. Once they've established a relationship with someone, they'll move into the next phase, which is devaluation. Now, love bombing in the first phase doesn't necessarily mean someone is a narcissist. I mean, when we first enter a new relationship, a lot of the characteristics of love bombing happen anyway because everything's new and it makes us feel good and we get swept away in that good feeling. But with a narcissist, when they go into this devaluation phase, that should be the big red flag that you're looking for. A narcissist will begin to devalue their partner, often starting with hints that the partner has done something to hurt or offend them, and that's when the gaslighting starts. To me, a big part of this is that natural point in a relationship when, to quote MTV's The Real World, people stop being polite and start getting real. The honeymoon phase of a relationship ends, real life starts to seep in. And that rush of good feelings in the relationship starts to level out. Suddenly, the narcissist isn't getting that good feeling anymore that makes them feel good about themselves. And so things shift toward wanting their partner to basically worship them. That's not the way healthy relationships work. So the narcissist will use tactics like gaslighting to make the other person feel like they've done something wrong and will work to make it up to the narcissist. Now the ego's being fed again and the narcissist starts to feel right, but just one time isn't enough. It needs to be constant, so the gaslighting techniques keep going, but they mix in behavior from that idealization phase. This is very much a calculated tactic. If they just keep hammering on someone, the narcissist knows things are going to fall apart, so they strike a blow, then they go back to praise and love bombing. To the partner, or probably victim is the right word by this point, they must have done something wrong, they're thinking, because now this incredible person is back and they're happy again. Once those good feelings start to fade again, another pattern of gaslighting and manipulation starts up, and around we go. The goal is complete reliance and dependence on the narcissist, and indicates a real fork in the road in a relationship. If the victim begins to show signs of dependence and willing to go along with the abuse, it can continue because the narcissist is going to keep getting what they need from the relationship. And for the victims that stick around, well, that's another psychological disorder that's closely related to narcissism: codependency. Codependency really deserves its own episode because it's an exceptionally large disorder. For now, I'll just give some basic characteristics of codependency so you can see exactly how they are a perfect match for the narcissist. Codependent people struggle with setting boundaries and have trouble saying no. They have low self-esteem, which causes them to only feel good when they're doing something for someone else. Interestingly, control is a big part of the mindset of a codependent, but not in the sense of wanting to be controlled. Instead, they feel that the other person can't survive without them being there to make sure things happen for the other person. A codependent person will give up things from their own life because they have this need to focus all of their efforts on the other person and that person's life. This means that they'll cut ties with friends and family, give up hobbies, and anything else that might get in the way of seeing the other person succeed. A codependent person has an intense fear of being alone, so they will overlook being treated poorly and abuse because those are things that aren't as bad as having to be alone in the world. So you see how this type of person is perfectly complementary to a narcissist. To a narcissist, everything's about themselves. To a codependent in a relationship with a narcissist, everything is also all about the narcissist. It's a perfect, psychologically unhealthy match. But the other branch of the fork is the people that don't fall into this all about you mentality. And when this happens, the narcissist enters the third phase of the relationship: discard. When a narcissist feels that they aren't going to keep getting what they need out of the relationship, they will end the relationship. And of course, this isn't done gently. It's fast, it's unexpected, and it's often extremely cruel. Interestingly, that part of the narcissist that needs to feel like they're the most important person in the room can take over. If they start this discard phase and the other person doesn't seem devastated, it might flip a switch for the narcissist, and they might quickly shift from discarding the relationship to going back to ideation and love bombing. See, a breakup with a narcissist has to be one-sided. The other person has to be hurt and crushed because this boosts the ego of the narcissist. In their mind, they are thinking, see, I was the best part of their world, and now I'm leaving. They're not worthy of me. But if the breakup turns mutual, or if the other person is attempting to break up, then it tells the narcissist that they weren't good enough, that they weren't the most important. So they'll attempt to start over, continuing the manipulation and try for either total dominance or emotional devastation. Of course, all of this has been more in the vein of romantic relationships, but that's not the only place it shows up. Almost all of the same behaviors can happen in the family dynamic between a narcissistic parent and their kids, and that's even worse. Kids can't break up with their parents. In most cases, they can't move out and just go live with someone else. They're stuck. But usually children of narcissists don't even have thoughts of leaving because it's all they've ever known. And it winds up being extremely psychologically damaging for the kids. Children that go through abuse from a narcissistic parent often have long-term trauma and experience anxiety, depression, dissociation, and even post-traumatic stress disorder. To a narcissistic parent, their child's achievements are a direct reflection of how great they are as a parent and a person. However, they won't show this to the child. Outside the home, they will constantly brag about how amazing the child is, thanks to their parenting and genetics, of course. But at home, the accomplishments are never good enough. They will never offer praise to the child. Why? Because praising the child in their mind will elevate the child above themselves. And nothing could be worse to a narcissist than not being the one on top. It really turns into the parent talking to their friends saying things like, he's the smartest in his class, he completely aced that science test, while at home telling the child that he's stupid, ugly, or worthless. The child will grow up with a very distorted view of themselves and of relationships and love. Depriving the child of positive emotions and building their self-esteem can even cause the same problems in the brain that leads to narcissism. It can also create the same perfect storm of having a fragile self-image and low self-esteem that can cause them to behave the same way as their narcissistic parent did, thus creating a new generation of narcissists. However, having a narcissistic parent doesn't automatically make someone a narcissist. It can go completely the other way, and the child can grow up to become codependent as they seek to please the parent and to take care of them because the parent just can't live without that child. Narcissism, of course, pops up at work too. Narcissists often are seen as the type A personalities and will climb the ladder of success quickly. It is not at all uncommon to find narcissists in positions of leadership. It really feels like I'm banging the same drum over and over here, but the narcissist needs to feel that everything reflects positively on them. So they'll take credit for work and ideas that their subordinates were responsible for. They will intentionally sabotage teams if there's another manager involved to share in the success, especially if that other manager is viewed as a threat to their own success and accolades. And don't even think about challenging them. In a healthy work environment, if a manager or supervisor makes a decision and someone from the team raises a concern, then the concerns are discussed and the decision may change. But when that manager or supervisor is a narcissist, they will shut down the concerns entirely and often will push to make that employee's life a living hell. There are definitely warning signs that you can see even from your first day working for a narcissist. Outside of boasting about how great they are and the accomplishments of the team that have happened at their direction, the team will also have a massive turnover rate. So if you get hired somewhere and the manager is extremely charming and boastful, but they're constantly having to hire to fill positions of people that quit, you might reconsider working there. It's not going to be a pleasant experience, that's for sure. For leadership, document everything. Keep track of what's going on with subordinates, especially the ones that are in leadership positions. Set clear guidelines and expectations, and if you start to notice some of these behaviors with the employee or their team, you may need to move them into a position that doesn't rely on teamwork, or you may simply just need to fire them. So learning all of this about what a narcissist really is, staying away from them at all costs sounds like a good plan, right? But what about when you don't realize someone is a narcissist and suddenly it's a big part of your life, either with a spouse or partner, a boss at work, or even a parent? What do you do then? How do you cope when you have a narcissist in your life? Well, the research highlights three main things. The first thing you can do is what they call the gray rock method. After reading about this method, I can already feel myself being emotionally exhausted because it definitely takes a lot of self-awareness, self-control, and emotional withholding. The idea is to become completely emotionally unresponsive or unremarkable, like a small gray rock. Don't respond. Don't get angry. Don't get defensive. Don't assume that you can plead your case and have them change, because they won't. Narcissists thrive on reaction and drama, so you have to starve them of this. Don't feed into it. When you have to respond to them, use short responses only. Don't allow emotion into your response, but instead stick with things like, oh yes, or okay. Don't give them personal information that they can try to weaponize against you later. This generally applies more in social or work environments. In a romantic relationship, of course, these kinds of things get talked about. Also use nonverbal ways of disengaging. One of the best tactics here is to avoid eye contact. While this might seem like a small thing to most people, eye contact shows interest and investment in whatever the discussion or argument is about. Eye contact also shows importance. An example of doing this successfully in my mind would be keep folding socks instead of turning to face them and maintaining eye contact. If you keep your focus on something other than the narcissist, it's going to completely break their method of control and abuse at that moment because they're not the center of the world. Although I wouldn't recommend using this tactic with everyone regardless of being a narcissist or not. If your spouse, for example, isn't a narcissist and they're trying to communicate some hurt, frustration, or anger with you, and you keep folding those socks, that's just flat out disrespectful. Also, pick your battles. A narcissist may start conflict or an argument all the time, and when you join in, you're giving them power. Also, if you're using the gray rock method, don't tell them that this is what you're doing. I mean, that might feel like common sense, but if you tell them that you're using this method, then in all likelihood, they're just going to try to use it against you to shame or manipulate you more. Along with the gray rock method, there are other things that you should do, especially in romantic relationships involving a narcissist. Keep a record or a log of everything, including emails and texts. Doing this will help you prevent them from distorting what actually happened. You should also set firm boundaries and stand by them inside yourself. As with most any kind of abuse, the narcissist will not respect or accept any boundaries you set. It's just a given fact. Instead, set those boundaries, and when they cross them, you have to respond. Don't set a boundary and then overlook things when they cross those. Some basic boundaries would be no name calling or sudden angry outbursts. And when someone crosses that line, rather than respond, you should simply walk away. Leave the situation and don't engage. Any kind of emotional response, either despair or anger, or any other response, is only going to add fuel to the narcissist's fire. And whenever possible, you should practice the BIFF communication with a narcissist. BIFF is an acronym for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. This is especially important when you have to interact with a narcissist, like in a co-parenting situation. Using this kind of communication will prevent any kind of real back and forth that helps a narcissist regain control. I think our natural desire is to make people understand our point of view, or to acknowledge when they've done something wrong, but a narcissist will never do that. So engaging with them beyond the BIFF communication style is really pointless. There are also things outside of interactions that you should do to protect yourself from a narcissist's attempts at control. The first thing that the sources recommend is to protect your finances. Pretty much for all of human existence, the sharing of resources like money has been a mainstay in relationships. But when that relationship is with a narcissist, they can use this access to your finance as tools for them to manipulate you, or even trap you in an abusive relationship. Like I have said, one of the first things a narcissist will do is to try to separate you from family and friends in order to destroy your support network. You cannot let this happen. In any kind of abusive relationship, your support network is your lifeline. They will see things that you don't. They will help you realize the situation, and even more importantly, they will be there to help you leave the situation. And when you do leave an abusive relationship with a narcissist, no contact is the only kind of contact you should strive for. You cannot leave that door open even a crack, because they will make every attempt to get back in. This isn't always possible, like with co-parenting type situations like I mentioned before, but in that case, you know to use the BIFF method of communication. Do not allow yourself to go further than that, because the tactics they might use to regain control may not be what you expect. They might start suddenly reflecting on the good times and memories. They might show remorse and regret, which are obviously not real things they feel because they don't show empathy. Really, what they are showing you is that they're hurting on the inside that you had the audacity to leave. If the narcissist is in the workplace, you might have to try some other self-protection tactics, like requesting to be moved to a different team or department, especially one that doesn't require team dynamics, or you might have to leave the job entirely. And don't overlook the importance of professional support. If you've been involved with a narcissist in one way or another, you are likely going to have some pretty big emotional wounds, and those aren't going to get any better without proper help and support from trained professionals. In therapy, the victim of a narcissist is going to get validation and clarity. A trained counselor is going to help them recognize gaslighting and dehumanization that the narcissist put them through. Along with standard talk therapy, mental health professionals might use a range of techniques to help with recovery as well. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, can be used to help you identify triggers, rebuild your self-esteem, and help with setting and keeping firm boundaries. They might also use EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, along with internal family systems to treat the symptoms of PTSD. EMDR is a technique used to treat PTSD that uses eye movements as sort of a focal point, while mentally you're focusing on identifying and addressing the triggers that someone might have after being in a relationship with someone that has a narcissistic personality disorder. Another great treatment option or method for people recovering from narcissistic abuse is group therapy. Now, I know for a lot of people, the idea of group therapy just doesn't sound great. Opening up about trauma or private life experiences is hard, and doing it in front of a group is even harder. But it's worth giving it a shot. The benefit here is that you will hear about other people's experiences and their recovery, which can go further toward healing than just talking to a counselor can. It's important that you understand that you're not alone in what you've experienced and what you're feeling. I think one of the things that makes narcissism seem scary is that someone with narcissistic personality disorder is often demonized. And logically, that makes sense. I mean, who wants to be around someone that will use any tool available to manipulate people around them and then toss them aside when they're no longer of use? However, narcissism is a disorder, a psychological condition, which means that inside this is a real living person that often just can't help being the way they are. So the good news is that there are treatments that can help them learn to control their symptoms and improve their relationships. While it might be hard to get a narcissist to seek help, it's worth the effort if it's someone that you truly care about. If a narcissist can see that there's a problem and is willing to work on themselves, then there is hope. A professional counselor has a few options to try to help. One thing they might do is to blend their good and bad views of themselves into one real messy human picture. This is known as transference-focused therapy. They might also use schema-focused therapy to target their cognitive and behavioral patterns known as schemas that develop early in life. Unfortunately, there are no medications to treat a personality disorder like narcissistic personality disorder directly, but often they will be prescribed antidepressants to manage symptoms that a narcissist regularly feels, namely anxiety and depression. Narcissism is complicated and messy, and even a bit scary to think about when it comes to our own relationships. Protecting our own mental health is and should be our first priority in life, so it makes perfect sense to want to run for the hills when you suspect that someone close to you is a narcissist. But as with anything in life, things aren't always black and white. The things we list off in our heads as telltale signs of a narcissist don't always mean that the person is a narcissist. A person can be selfish or self-centered, prioritizing their own needs or forgetting to ask about your day without being a narcissist, mainly in that they still will feel remorse and empathy. Neurodiversity is pretty regularly mistaken for narcissism as well. Someone that's neurodivergent processes social information differently, which can look like the cold, self-obsessed behavior of a narcissist. And people with ADHD might interrupt you frequently or seem to ignore you, but this is related to the impulsivity and dysfunction of ADHD and not a lack of interest in your feelings or wanting to dominate you emotionally. Similarly, someone that is autistic might struggle with maintaining eye contact, social cues, or the normal back and forth flow of a conversation, which can come across as arrogance and disinterest, but it's actually just a difference in communication style. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, is another reason why someone might seem like they're a narcissist. They might be really sensitive to criticism, which can look like narcissistic rage, but in actuality, they're seeing the criticism as a threat. They will also tend to withdraw emotionally as a way to avoid being vulnerable, which can look like a lack of empathy. Depression and burnout are also mistaken for narcissism pretty often. Someone struggling with depression or burnout doesn't have the mental bandwidth to care for others. Instead, they focus inward, which can look like narcissism. And when you pair that with the irritability that comes with depression, it can look like someone is hostile, controlling, and just being plain full of themselves. But this isn't narcissism. It's someone that's so depressed or so burnt out that they're just completely empty inside, and they're struggling to survive mentally. And of course, there's the influence of social media. And, this is one of the reasons I think we would probably be better off without social media altogether. Thanks to social media, posts by people with no education in psychology are taking the outer shell of what they know of narcissism and applying it to anyone that they find themselves in conflict with. Gaslighting has also gotten a lot of attention on social media, and maybe even more ridiculous, as I've seen videos where people say that a stoplight is gaslighting them. Objects don't gaslight. Conflict isn't narcissism. When you're in a disagreement or other conflict with someone and you don't take into account the matter of different perspectives, and instead of accuse them of being a narcissist, you're shutting down proper, effective communication. The other person is going to get defensive, and with good reason. They will shut down as they feel like their character is being attacked, or they may counterattack, which ultimately leads to being unable to resolve the conflict entirely. Accusing someone of narcissism during an argument also weaponizes psychology in an effort to win an argument, which is going to likely end in the other person reacting with anger or withdrawal, which you might see as further proof of narcissism, but in reality, you're creating a toxic feedback loop within yourself. Another major issue with accusing someone of narcissistic behavior during a conflict is the loss of safety that they will feel. Emotional safety is built on the idea that you can be flawed without being thrown away. But as soon as you use a clinical label as a weapon, that safety vanishes. So, how do you know if someone is a narcissist or if it's something else? Well, unless you spend years in school to become a diagnostic psychologist, you don't. This is where you need to rely on your friends, family, and most importantly, your own mental health counselor to help you sort through situations and conflicts. You need to make an informed decision, and during times of conflict, this can be hard to do alone. Rely on the people around you to help you with input. Don't throw the disorder out there during the heat of an argument because you will likely be doing damage that cannot be undone. Instead, take time out. Calm yourself down. Look at things again and try seeing things from the other perspective. And not just your own, to try to understand why the other person has responded the way that they have. Ultimately, if you feel like you have a relationship with someone that is a narcissist, watch for the warning signs, like separating the people in your life that you're closest with, grandiose behavior, and a true lack of empathy. And then talk to your mental health professional as well as family and friends. You should always protect your own emotional well-being first. So if you need to walk away, then walk away. But if it's a relationship that you value and some of the hallmarks of narcissism just aren't there, sit and have an honest conversation, maybe even in the form of couples counseling, to better understand the situation so that you can work towards figuring out the issues that you're facing. Because like I said, once you weaponize a psychological diagnosis or disorder in an effort to win an argument, you may already be at the point of no return. I hope you found today's episode especially helpful and full of good information. Narcissism is one of those subjects that both makes my skin crawl, but also irritates me because people do have a habit of using the word narcissism in vain. And I hope that the new format has been a welcome change. Part of my own growth is understanding the way my own mind works, and it really clicked for me as I went back and looked at past topics and talked to my wife about it all. when I write, I tend to get very textbook, and that's just not the vibe I'm going for with this podcast. So I hope this one has been better, and I'm going to keep working to improve things. Next week, we're going to look more in depth at narcissism's for better or worse partner, codependency. We mentioned it briefly in today's episode, but next week, we're really going to get into the meat of what codependency is, how it comes about in people's lives, and what it is like to live with codependency, and what you can do about it if you find yourself to be codependent. We'll also look more at how codependency is the jelly to narcissism's peanut butter. I hope you've enjoyed today's show, and as always, please feel free to reach out with comments, questions, or topic suggestions to hello@yourmindonpodcast.com, via Instagram @yourmindonpodcast, or visit www.yourmindonpodcast.com to learn more about the show, stream episodes directly from your browser, and learn more about who I am. And be sure to leave a rating in your preferred listening app. The more ratings, the more listeners will come, and will allow me to focus more on creating great episodes to share with you all. Once again, thank you for listening today. I'm John Shaw, and remember, understanding your mind is the first step to changing your life. Until next time, be kind to yourself.